All right, hey, what's up, everybody? Mike Lindsley back with you for an ML Sports Take. It's all brought to you by Empower Federal Credit Union, Bryant and Stratton College, and Rosie's Corner. If you are in and around Central New York, make sure you get to Rosie's Corner, the official pizza shop of the ML Sports Platter. Pizza, pasta, hot, and cold subs, you name it. They've got amazing wings as well, the Gold Fever, the Garlic Parm, the regular wings. Get on over to Rosie's Corner in front of the Brewerton Bridge, available on Grubhub. Like them on Facebook, follow them on Instagram for all the food-themed, the themed food days that they have during the week as well, including Fish Friday and your Meatloaf Monday. So I'm reading Big Fella right now by Jane Levy, the absolutely terrific author. Jane Levy has written books on Mickey Mantle called The Last Boy. She's written the Sandy Koufax biography, and she's written this incredible piece on Babe Ruth, this book. And it really has to do with Babe Ruth in terms of his phenomenon and how he was way ahead of his time and all the rest. And boy, was he ever, in terms of challenging Kennesaw Mountain Landis with the race relations, challenging Kennesaw Mountain Landis about how baseball needed a barnstorm after the World Series in order to promote the game. You know, send guys to Japan, send guys to other countries. Kennesaw Mountain Landis was against it. Babe Ruth was all for promotions and sending athletes wherever they could, for free. And it's just a terrific book. But I'm reading this book and I'm going, man, this guy was ahead of his time. And then I'm thinking about 2020, and here we are, and we are in the social media age. We're talking about 100 years almost to the day when Babe Ruth was sold from the Red Sox to the Yankees. Because Harry Frazee wanted to make some money on a Broadway play in terms of No No Nanette. And I got to thinking, and I was like, what would Babe Ruth think about today? You know, what would he think about YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, which is an absolute maniacal operation in terms of a lot of it being a cesspool, but by the same token, it is somewhere where all of us go to go get our news before anything. Twitter basically makes the internet old in terms of how we can get information. If you go to the internet and look for an article now, it's already been posted on Twitter. The news that you're looking for has already been posted on Twitter. People are live tweeting at press conferences. And by the time journalists write out a story, Twitter's already beaten the internet by a couple hours perhaps. So it got me thinking, how many people, what are my top 5 or 10? I don't know. I'm really not going to do a list, but who are some of the top people I wish today I could see on Twitter from long days, long years gone by, right? So some of the sports people, the athletes, and I think, some of the entertainers, music, etc. I'm going to start with sports, and Ruth would be one. I think Babe Ruth would have been phenomenal on Twitter. Could you imagine him tweeting about prohibition? Could you imagine him tweeting after hitting a home run at Archibald Stadium in an exhibition over the press box area, and him walking out outside of Archibald on the campus of Syracuse University, and all these kids surrounding him, and that famous picture that the photographer got of Babe Ruth with his top hat and all the fans around him? Stuff like that would have been amazing. 60 home run year, 1927 Yankees and Murderers Row, him and Lou Gehrig taking selfies in the dugout with Twitter. I mean, I just think he would have been unbelievable. He would have chugged beers and put it on Twitter. I mean, this guy would have been absolutely amazing. Chugging beers, pounding hot dogs. Babe Ruth would have been money on Twitter. I think another athlete who would have been amazing on Twitter is my dog is scratching at the door, so I'm going to get him so he can join me for the last part of this video, would be Joe Namath. I think when you look at Joe Namath and his overall success and the guaranteeing of victory in Super Bowl III, I think Joe Namath would have been absolutely amazing. When you think about the Baltimore Colts being the superpower that they were in the NFL, and of course, Joe Namath guaranteeing victory. Could you imagine in today's day and age with Twitter, if he had tweeted out, I guarantee victory in Super Bowl III, and then the media horde around him in the sun chair by the pool, getting ready for the Super Bowl. I mean, that is epic stuff. It would have gotten 100,000 retweets and likes and all the rest. Would have been an unbelievable tweet by Joe Namath. I mean, Broadway Joe on Twitter. Are you absolutely kidding me right now? This guy would have been gold on Twitter. A couple other guys I think who would have been awesome on Twitter would be Vince Lombardi and Hank Stram, a couple of guys who are, outgoing coaches, would have been phenomenal on Twitter. Irvin Johnson, I know, is on Twitter now, but Magic in his heyday in the 1980s with the Showtime Lakers out at clubs and out at the Forum and, tweeting out videos of unbelievable behind-the-back passes to James Worthy and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I think those guys would have been absolutely unbelievable on Twitter. A couple other guys who come to mind in terms of how they would be on Twitter. I think Patrick Waugh in hockey would be absolutely phenomenal because he was such an outspoken guy. He came up in '86, played for the Canadians, of course, won a Stanley Cup early, won another one in '93. He would have been unbelievable on Twitter as well. You think about all the events of days gone by with like the O.J. Simpson chase, the stabbing of Monica Seles. You think about the Tanya Harding situation. That would have been gold. So event-based stuff would have been big as well. Who knows what would have happened with 9/11 on Twitter? I can't imagine all of that with all the videos and stuff. In fact, I'm glad we didn't have Twitter back then because it would have been really ugly, I think, especially with what was happening with people jumping out of the buildings and all that. But you think about some of the events in sports and all the rest. But I think the number one athlete, in my opinion, who I would love to be on Twitter, Muhammad Ali. Are you kidding me? Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, him tweeting, "I am the greatest," the interviews with Howard Cosell. Boy, you want to talk about some unbelievable stuff. Muhammad Ali would have been gold on Twitter. And oh, by the way, speaking of Howard Cosell, he would have been unreal on Twitter as well. Grantland Rice would have been incredible. I think you would have had some major guys going on in terms of the journalism world from days gone by as well. But I think Muhammad Ali would have been the best guy on Twitter from the sports world. This guy would have been a maniac on Twitter in terms of his braggadocio, his me, and the press conferences and getting in front of the microphone and in front of the camera. Muhammad Ali was something else. He was some treat. I think he would have been great on Twitter and certainly would go viral all the time. As far as entertainment goes, as far as some musicians go, I think about the Beatles. I think about the Beatles, how they had when they hit America and went to Shea Stadium and had their thing, and of course that whole, English rock infusion of music, which was incredible, the Beatles and the Stones and the Who and all those bands. But the Beatles were really, with the flop hair and the Ed Sullivan Show and all the rest, they were guys who loved the camera. They loved the microphone. They wanted the interviews. They wanted the backstage stuff. John, Paul, Ringo, and George. It would have been unbelievable to see those guys tweeting, back behind the stage, and Paul McCartney with shots of him playing Yesterday solo. And how about the Beatles that got into a ton of drugs late in their career in terms of the White Album and Sgt. Pepper's, and how about the fake death stuff with the Beatles, and when are the Beatles breaking up? I mean, Twitter would have broken in the late '60s as the Beatles rumors were swirling about when they were going to break up. The Abbey Road album and all the rest. I mean, could you imagine English journalists tweeting things out, and then those guys coming out and quote tweeting them walking across the road? So those are some of the things that come to mind for me in terms of sports, in terms of entertainment, in terms of music. I would have loved Elvis Presley on Twitter, for example. A guy like that, shaking and moving and offending people, of course, back in the day. I think about a guy like Prince on Twitter with his wild outfits and the purple and all the rest. I think about a guy like Michael Jackson on Twitter. I think about, Madonna on Twitter. I think about, Lady Gaga now is on Twitter. Well, that would have been Madonna back in the day for sure. I think about MC Hammer on Twitter. Can't touch this, and the whole dance moves and all the rest. There's so many people who I think about back in the day on Twitter. It's unbelievable. You think about Donald Trump and Barack Obama right now, however you feel about your political angle, those two guys are on Twitter all the time. I think Donald Trump's on Twitter for the wrong reasons. Barack Obama seems to be pretty civilized on Twitter, no question. But you think about some of the guys back in the day. Bobby Kennedy, maybe he probably would have been the president times two, right? 2 terms if he had not gotten assassinated. He would have gone on Twitter for sure. And then I think, like Barack Obama, John F. Kennedy would have been on Twitter quite a bit. I think Eisenhower, I like Ike and the whole campaign there. I think he would have been a really interesting Twitter guy as well. So those are just some of the thoughts of some of the people from a long time ago who I think would have been absolutely fun on social media. But we don't have to worry about it because, well, it was a different era. But boy, wouldn't it have been fun to see them all. But above all, Muhammad Ali. I'm Mike Lindsley, ML Sports and Entertainment Take.